Good morning. Quick question. Do you think your estate plan is set just because you created a trust? So, today we're going to talk about this because a trust without funding is like a bank account without money. It is completely useless, but I am going to bring in Jeff Marsocci, the plain English attorney. His link will be in the description below. He does a tremendous amount of educational content here on YouTube and across all social media platforms. But before we get going, hit that like and subscribe button, post your comments below. We will get to them because today we're literally going to talk about safeguarding your legacy like a pro. So, with that said, let's get into this. Morning, Jeff.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good, buddy. How are you?
Doing well.
Hey, so let's just jump into this,
Yeah.
Jeff. I know you create so much educational content, but really,
Yeah.
what does it mean funding a trust? Like really, what is
Yeah.
that?
Well, okay, let me put it this way, and this is the way I describe it to my clients. When we're putting together a revocable living trust and all the other documents that have to go along with it, basically, I am building you the perfect suitcase to fit your custom needs
Hmm.
for your final trip. So I'm putting together that suitcase. Now, if that final trip comes along, you grab your suitcase, you get on the plane, you check the bags. It's okay. You go, you reach your destination, you open it up, and there's nothing in there. Well, you can't start screaming at the suitcase that it did something wrong. It's like, well, wait a minute. You need to
Oh.
actually pack the suitcase. So this is where I come in and talk about trust funding. You need to make sure that the title to your assets is in the name of the trust, or the trust is the beneficiary upon death, or there's some other strategy working with beneficiaries to make sure the entire plan works the way it's supposed to. You can't just sign a trust and treat it as if it's just a magical document that suddenly everything just ends up in your trust.
So
The
Jeff,
most of my clients, yeah,
why do
go ahead.
people like people will set up a trust, right? But in
Hmm.
your experience, why do people set them up and then fail to fund it? Like, where is that? How's that gap
Yeah.
happen?
Well, the revocable living trust is generally designed to avoid probate. You need to make sure assets are titled in the trust because probate transfers title after death. I think it's because a lot of attorneys just absolutely fall down on the job of providing education about, well, okay, you've got this revocable trust. You heard about it. You read about it. It's to avoid probate. And then they just sign the documents. It's like, okay. And then they hand them a little sheet that says, here's how you're supposed to go and fund your trust. And it's like 2 or 3 pages. And people go, oh, well, I signed my documents. I must be fine. There isn't an
Oh,
emphasis on it. In my own practice, we have a full process that with an estate strategy session, a summary meeting, going over the documents, signing them. And then we have a very specific meeting for trust funding where we go through all their different assets and come up with an exact checklist and send it to them with the recommended actions so they have something solid custom to them, not just a printout.
so Jeff, are there certain types of assets that make the most sense to put into a trust?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things that are generally slam dunks.
Okay.
Real estate, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, but that's your after-tax dollars, not your IRAs and 401ks.
Okay.
Uh, Most bank accounts, there's a couple of exceptions there, and your personal property. Depending on the state, depending on how difficult it is, vehicles should also be titled in the name of the trust. In North Carolina, it becomes a big deal, and a lot of my clients get frustrated. It's like, okay, well, if that's the only thing that goes through probate, not that big of a deal.
Right. So on the flip side, though, are there assets that probably should not go in the trust?
Well, almost always IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, all of those taxable accounts. Anything that's you pull out a dollar, you get taxed on a dollar. All
Hmm.
right. When you move an IRA or a 401k into any kind of trust, the government says, thank you for pulling out all your money. We want all of that tax money now. And if you're
Oh,
too early, then suddenly you're paying penalties on top of it. So that's the one thing that just almost across the board, we don't move into a trust. We make sure the beneficiaries line up with the overall estate plan.
What about special considerations, Jeff? I mean, I know that there's a lot of them, which could be like a webinar in and of itself. But are there certain things that should or should not go into a trust for special considerations?
Well, if you can define special considerations, if
Like a
here's just an
like a child in need.
Oh, if you've got a special needs beneficiary, well, yeah, you put that in the trust, but the trust should have the language to protect them so it doesn't go out to them
Oh,
directly.
okay.
So your trust can provide the correct language to make sure that it stays in the hands of a trustee throughout their lifetime so they don't lose whatever benefits they're getting. And yeah, that special needs beneficiary planning could be a whole other webinar on its own.
Okay. Now, you kind of mentioned this a little bit that you go through a process for funding. What are some of the first steps that someone ought to take when they've set up a trust and now that it's time to move assets over? Like, what is that first step?
Well, the very first step is get organized. If you don't have a checklist from the attorney with the list of recommendations like we do, all right, well, you want to make sure you're listing out every single thing that you have that has some kind of title and ownership to it. And then you decide on a case by case basis, all right, what needs to go into the trust? What needs to stay out of the trust? And we need to line up the beneficiaries. But just getting organized, that's a huge step in itself. And once you got the checklist, you just run the checklist.
Now, Jeff, and I say this quite a bit. I don't mean to pick on CPAs, and a couple things that
Mhm.
you've mentioned. When a client sits down with an attorney, how do they know if the attorney is doing things right when they don't even know what they don't know?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by
Well,
that.
like Jeff, if I sit down with you, okay,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
my friend says, "Hey, dude, you need to get a trust," and I'm like, "Great." So what you and
Yeah.
I sit down, and then, but I also sit down with Joe Smith.
Mhm.
How do I know? I mean, other than getting a checklist together, right, and having that, but how do I know Joe Smith is going to do the same job that you do? How do I know what questions to ask Joe Smith about how to fund my
Yeah.
trust properly, other than having an empty suitcase when the time comes?
Well, it's making sure that you're providing enough education to yourself. You're gathering this information online. And I'll be the first to admit, look, there is a lot of bad information that's out there. In fact, in several weeks, I've got a video coming out. There's a video that an attorney put of the things you should never put into your trust. And there was so much disinformation,
Mm.
misinformation, half truths, and whatnot. This video's got 2 million views. It's like, okay,
What?
so that's just a lot of bad information. Yeah, it was don't ever put your vehicles into your trust. All your trustee needs to do is go down to the DMV with a death certificate and they'll sign it right over. No, that's not true. You need all the probate papers and all the other stuff. Oh, never put an annuity into a trust because it triggers all these taxes. Well, only if it was funded with like IRA money. It
Oh,
so you look at this on a case by case basis. Now, look, if you don't want to go through all of that education, it's getting to an attorney who understands and knows what they're doing. See what kind of materials they have, see what kind of reputation they have. Specifically, ask them on the front end when you're trying to get your plan put together. Tell me more about trust funding. What do you do as the attorney with trust funding? Now, I'm fortunate to have a good relationship with several financial advisors. They end up really being key in making sure that the stuff that they're managing, the stocks, bonds, mutual funds,
mm.
get over entitled into the name of the trust. And they work very well with me and in coordination. And we bounce these questions off of each other. Hey, we've got this particular asset. That's when you know you've got some good professionals working together. If they can talk about your particular situation and come together and develop a game plan, and you may not even be in the room as a client.
I love it. I love it. Now, you mentioned something about bank accounts. Is it as simple as just filing a form? Like how easy is it to title something in the name of the trust?
Every bank has its own forms to follow.
Okay.
So when I'm putting together this list for my clients, and it just happened to have that sample trust. So it's like, okay, here's your trust. take that trust down to the bank along with those recommendations, put the recommendations on top of the trust, plop it right down on the bank representative's desk and say, point to it here. The attorney said to do this. They'll have the forms to make that happen. So I've got the recommended action. The bank has its own form. How complex is that form? It depends on the bank.
And that's also, I mean, not just each bank, right? I mean, each state is different. Is that correct? Or is it roughly
Well,
the same in the states?
it's each bank. Yeah.
Okay.
If you've got a bank that's across multiple states, usually when they're putting together these forms, they will make it so that if there's anything required in one state, it's just on the form for all of them.
Okay. Now, Jeff, on kind of a side note here, is
Mhm.
this process different for business owners in terms of transferring business interests in there? Or is there a separate process for business owners and their business and assets from the business?
Well, okay. This is where there's a lot of misconceptions when business owners are coming in for estate planning. Well, look, we're putting together your revocable living trust. We're trying to make sure you're funding it with your assets, but one of those assets is this business. Well, look, if you've got, and this happens a lot with my clients who have rental property, and maybe they've got another business selling ice cream. It's an ice cream shop. Okay.
Mhm.
We're not taking the house out of your LLC and moving it into the trust. We're not taking the business account and moving it into the trust. We're not taking the inventory and moving it into the trust. We're moving your LLC shares, or we're moving your incorporation papers, your stock certificates get retitled in the name of the trust with you as the trustee. So it's moving the stock. You don't have to move the individual assets. I treat it like a wallet. It's like, okay, look, you really need to take your wallet out of your back pocket and put it into your left front pocket. Well, you don't pull all the money and the cards out and shove it into the pocket separately. You just
Right.
move the whole thing. So you move your whole business into your trust.
So let's just say, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, right? But if the owner has issued options, which means they haven't been paid for,
Mhm.
and he transfers them into the trust, would that be considered a taxable event?
Well, okay, that's a very complicated one, and it's options. Okay, they haven't executed it. They don't really own it. It's just
Correct.
something. Okay, if you don't own it yet, then you shouldn't move it into the trust.
Gotcha. Okay.
If there's some paperwork with the company, it's a benefit and whatnot. Usually, there's some contingency of, well, what if I die? Can my family execute these options? There might be some paperwork to say, yes, it's my trustee and the options will pay into my trust if they execute them.
Okay. And I mean, I'm not saying this is complicated, but it is individualized. How
Mhm.
often should someone be reviewing and updating their assets in the trust?
Okay, I really hope all of my trust clients are hearing this. Every year,
Every year. Okay.
we have an annual review meeting as part of this process for all of my trust clients. I wish they came in every year to just kind of stay on top of it, but I know more realistically, it's every couple of years. But when I'm talking with my clients and they're making changes to their plan, that's about every 5 to 7 years. But they may change accounts, they may switch banks, they may change up as much as a third or more of their assets in that 5 to 7 year period, and they don't end up getting everything in the trust. There was a few years ago, well, actually probably more than 10 now, there was a pretty big bank and they came up with this genius idea. Oh, let's just charge a $5 a month ATM fee for anyone who has a checking account. And then we're not going to do any per transaction ATM fees. So all of these people who had a debit card but never took money out, they went absolutely bonkers and started pulling all of their money out
Okay.
and going to other banks. 6 weeks later, the bank said, yeah, this was a bad idea. We're kidding. We're not going to do this anymore.
I
For
love it.
that whole year and more, as I'm sitting down with my clients and going through, okay, so do you still have X bank accounts. Oh no, did you hear what they did? Well, yeah, I did hear what they did. We went right down to Bank Z and they set up an account. I was like, did they set it up in the name of your trust or your individual name?
Uh,
We were so upset with Bank X that we just opened it up in our names. So those annual review meetings are where we catch those things and make sure the trust stays funded as much as possible.
and what happens if somebody forgets to transfer assets and they pass away?
Then very likely those assets are going into probate.
So you could
Now,
literally fill the suitcase and along the way pull clothes out, and then when you get to your
mhm.
destination, the suitcase is still empty?
Yeah, if you take out let's just say you've got 3 or 4 stops in the airport and you decide, "Well, I'm just gonna take my suitcase and I'm gonna change my clothes," and you leave your clothes in the bathroom. Yep, empty suitcase.
So then, and I know you see this, Jeff, why do so many clients think that their estate plan is kind of set it and forget it?
Well, it's because I think a lot of attorneys just don't emphasize the funding part for a trust, that people just assume that they signed a document and like I said before, it quote magically just moved everything in, and they don't end up realizing, "Oh, it needed to be funded in the first place." And so, yeah, set it and forget it. And that's really the way a will works as well. So if you're doing a last will and testament, yeah, everything that ends up in probate goes according to your will. People will do a will and then not think about it for 20 years. It's a little bit different with a trust. If you want to avoid probate, if you want to avoid problems, if you want to keep the court system and the government out of your estate plan, put together a trust, but make sure it's funded.
Now, there's a lot of online resources now, right? That you could just, it's kind of like buying life insurance online, right?
Mhm.
um, how valid are these online platforms? Are they worth using? Can somebody do this on their own?
Okay, here's the stats on that because I actually do have a program for the people who want to do it themselves.
Okay.
There's about 70% of the population, the adult population, that has no plan whatsoever in the US.
Okay.
Okay. There's between, depending on the study, about 20 to 22% have an estate plan and they worked with an attorney to do it. So that leaves about 8 to 10% that just do it on their own. Okay. I've had some very intelligent people come in, and I had one set a couple, both of them PhDs, brilliant in their individual field,
Right.
and they said, "Here, we had another attorney put these wills together. Can you check them for us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, already I knew it. It wasn't. It was a do it yourself." And I'm looking at it. I'm like, "Oh, so did you intend to cut out each other as beneficiaries and go right to the kids?" "Oh no, we didn't mean that." "Okay, and you do realize that you're also not executors for each other's estate. You went right to your brother and you went right to your sister." "Oh, no, that's not what we meant."
Oh,
"Oh, and
wow.
you do realize the kids get everything at age 18." "Oh, that's way too young." And then I get to the last page and I go, "Oh, don't worry about it." "Why?" "Because it wasn't even signed correctly. You
Oh,
signed your own wills, you witnessed each other's wills, which is prohibited under most state laws, if not all of them, and you left the second witness spot blank." And it's okay. There are people out there who can follow the signing instructions. They can go ahead and execute it the way they want, but it's not as simple as just downloading a form. Now, the system that we put together is at estatepatch.com, and it runs you through going and picking your choices and what ends up being a good plan, and here's what other people have done, and you can go through and fill out the documents. But we also provide on the back end an awful lot of material on here's how to make some of these decisions, here's how some of these things work. And a part of it, I have a separate trust funding course. I put all the materials in there too. So if you sign up for that, you're getting all of that educational stuff in the background too.
hmm.
Is it for everyone? No, but it's for that 8 to 10%. If you want an attorney that understands and knows what they're doing, well, okay, that's a separate matter.
So then if someone's watching, realizing they've got to get things together, what's the best next step for them? Because you don't operate in every state. So what is the next
Correct.
step for them in their given state?
Well, okay, I'll put out a free resource, even though it's in 49 out of 50 cases, it's not going to get me any business. Freetrustcourse.com. Again,
Okay.
it's freetrustcourse.com. This has a free version of my book, Estate Planning Basics. It's got the pre-appointment questionnaire that we require from my law office. And so if you read through the book, you're going to get the basics of what's the difference between a will and a trust and what's probate like. And there's a whole chapter specifically on trust funding and why it's important. And that questionnaire, well, look, if you're going to fill out that questionnaire, there's a good chance that it's most of what any other attorney in your state or jurisdiction would be looking for information up front anyway. So it's going to help you get organized. Plus, we put other things that are in there. So yeah, get a little bit of research, but then you need to find the right attorney who fits what you're looking for. So you want to find that right professional. If you need a recommendation, you can call my law office. I'm part of a network of attorneys and advisors, and we all kind of collectively use similar or the same documents, but still state specific. So I know at least the documents are going to be good if I'm recommending you go to someone in this network as an attorney.
And Jeff, what's that link again?
Well, the free materials, it's freetrustcourse.com.
Okay. I'll put that in the description below.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that will get you the information for my law office as well if you need a recommendation.
Okay. Fantastic. And Jeff, you mentioned this earlier, and I'll end with this one. You mentioned working with other professionals and how important that is, but really, I don't mean to kind of hound on this one, but I think it's crucial. Working with other professionals, making sure everybody's working together. How important is it?
It's really important. The coordination is key to make sure that things don't get dropped. The other thing is if you have these professionals working together on your behalf, you end up getting the best answers. Now, this is more in the line of Medicaid planning, which is something that I do. I'm a certified Medicaid planner in addition to everything else. I have to take a look at a broad perspective when we're talking about seniors potentially qualifying for Medicaid while we're keeping as much as possible. If you go to any accountant and I'm saying, look, they've got $75,000 in an IRA, it's November, pull out half the money and then pull out half the money in the next taxable year and move it into the trust, an accountant who isn't coordinating is just going to lose their mind. You're paying all this money in taxes and you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't make that move. Well, wait a minute. Making that move and paying those taxes could end up saving $12,000 to $15,000 a month.
Oh.
In the nursing home fees, it's going to get drained out anyway. This is part of an overall plan. Okay, so, oh, well, you want to name the kids as the beneficiaries on an IRA. This is just a regular trust thing. Well, how old are the kids? Well, they're 19 and 21. Well, wait, in your estate plan, you said you wanted them to not get anything until age 40.
Oh.
Well, depending on the level of tax, oh, you want the trust to be the beneficiary because any tax advantage you're going to get, naming them as an individual beneficiary, pales in comparison to the fact that all this money is going to be lost because they end up getting the money direct to access and then just waste it. There was another attorney, I wish I could take credit for this. He said there is 100% tax on an irresponsible beneficiary because they're just going to spend everything. You need to balance and look at all of these things together. And if you've got a good attorney, financial advisor, an accountant in particular for estate planning and with the trust, they can come together and make sure they're getting you the best optimal plan and have recommendations for all of your assets. That makes sense.
I love it. Jeff, as always, thank you so much. Everybody watching, Plain English Attorney, links will be below. Jeff, you do so much education content. Appreciate you being here. And if you guys have any questions, let us know. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.